we as Americans and that the rest of the world understands why we're doing it. Plus, it's really damn expensive. Why are we doing these things? Not to say that we shouldn't, but it needs to be clear and not so subjective. Subjectivity opens us up to this criticism, which has helped. And I'm not one of those that says, you know, 9/11 was our fault. I don't believe that we had some sort of secret conversation about having that. But we don't help ourselves when we get involved in these subjective skirmishes. You look over at Pakistan. My God, have we made ourselves a little mess over there. We have convinced ourselves that we need Pakistan more than Pakistan needs us because of Afghanistan. Holy crap, what do you do there? Right? Until we get out of Afghanistan, we can't actually deal with Pakistan on a reasonable basis because they have us fairly hamstrung. We need to get out of there, then we can address that situation, and we can start spending a lot less on defense. We recently probably heard in the news there's this big battle over the tariffs with China. China's going to put all these tariffs on our cars. Everyone went nuts. And my favorite, the Donald, got involved. And what I do really, I actually genuinely enjoy him. I love how he can get people who otherwise wouldn't pay attention. Because the thing I'm really shooting for right now is just get people to get involved, get them to pay attention, get them to question. And he attracts and interests a group that otherwise might not really be involved. He starts piping off about how we're just going to go after China and there's, you know, incarnate. Now, granted, China still has a rather frightening form of government. But let's look at the reality of our situation with them. When China joined the World Trade Organization, since that time, our exports to China have gone up 5-fold. Our imports from China have only gone up 4-fold. It's not really that bad. Granted, got a long ways to go. That's a good start. And while that is happening, look at what's happening in China. They're urbanizing. So they're taking people from the farms and they're all moving into the cities. Now what are you going to do? Now they're more powerful. It's a lot easier to control a rural society than it is to control one that's been heavily urbanized. Now they're starting to push back. You see where the Wenzhou district, where they took over the city and the Chinese people, the Chinese government said, oh, it's all good, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. No, it wasn't. But they're fighting back, and they've got technology, and they're aware of what's going on in the rest of the world, and now they're starting to have economic power. And as that economic power and that affluence rises, they're going to be able to, the people of China will be able to do something about their political situation. It's very hard to care about your form of government when you're trying to put food on the table for your kids. Who cares? But as their affluence goes up, and trade with us, big part of helping that affluence rise. We have to think a little bit longer term. China does. China does not think in terms of the next presidential cycle. China thinks in terms of decades. And that's not to put any kind of glory to China, because obviously their totalitarian government is not something that somebody who hangs out with Napolitano is going to be in favor of. But if we look on the long term, you can't overnight switch a culture from an agrarian, totalitarian dictatorship to one that has an appreciation for the free markets and liberty. A little affluence goes a long way. A little trade with the U.S. goes a long way to that. Then we look at our economy. And this is where things go kind of south for the evening, but I will bring it back up. We've now got our debt to GDP ratio, which is our national debt to GDP, has now gone over 100%. And I bet, just from this group, you guys are probably all familiar or heard of the Reinhardt-Rogoff study on what happens as countries start reaching that level. So they did a study on, as a country reaches that level, their economy has to slow. Now, why is that? Well, unlike many of those in government, we're aware that debt just doesn't come falling out of the sky, that the money for debt. To fund all of this government debt, the money has to come from somewhere. Now, a good portion of it, unfortunately, is coming from China. They have 25% of the debt held outside of the U.S., which makes that whole trade thing even more fun. Because who the hell wants to be the politician in charge when China says, just to mess with you, we're not going to buy any more this month. It's a little bit of pressure. Now, granted, they're not going to do that for the long term because it's not in their best interest. And anybody who says China's going to totally screw us over and make the treasuries just plummet, that's just silly. They're not stupid. It would not be in their best interest to have the treasury fall. They own too many of them. But if you were China, it would be fun, and they've got a long-term perspective, so it would be a lot of fun to mess with some politician, maybe a president here or there, who doesn't do what you want him to do. And you can take that short-term hit because you've got decades on your time horizon. You don't have a presidential cycle. I don't like my politicians. They've already got enough pressure on them from all kinds of very large businesses that have offices on K Street, coming out of Wall Street, that have way too much pressure on my government. I don't want China also having power over my politicians, the ability to persuade gently that they should do something that may not be in our best interest. So our debt, we got a big problem with debt. Then we look at, unfortunately, the household level. The long-term historical norm for household debt as a percentage of household income is about 65%. Then we got Alan Greenspan, my buddy. He came in and he said, you know what, everyone should own a house. Because that's a good thing. And it sounded really good. It sounds great to say home ownership because there's all these statistics about how when you have a high level of home ownership, communities are safer, economies are healthier, except they did what they always do in government is they mistake correlation for causation. It's not that owning a home makes for a more affluent community. Owning a home doesn't make it safer, it doesn't make people more responsible, and it sure as hell doesn't make them smarter. It's the byproduct. You own a home because you had all those other things. Because you had those things, you were able to buy a home. Oh, screw that, we're just going to lower the standards. Take the short way. And we all saw how that worked out. So now, household income to debt peaked at 135%. It went from 65% to 135%. And now we're only down to about 120, which is good. We're moving in the right direction, but we still got a long ways to go. And then there's income. Like how are you going to pay down all that debt? Household income levels are right now at about 1996 levels. When they talk about this unemployment, it's getting better. Well, unfortunately, part of that unemployment that's getting better is because people are leaving the workforce. And I also see statistics. Attrition. Yeah, they're giving up. Those who aren't giving up, who actually are getting jobs, because jobs are showing up. There are more jobs. Except they're in tourism. They're in retail. They're the low-paying jobs replacing the higher-paying jobs. We're getting low-skilled, low-paying jobs. And you could probably all know people. You have friends who have been through this, where these very good, high-paying jobs are getting replaced with the low-paying jobs. That's not going to help us lower that debt level, which we really need to do. And one thing to watch too when they talk about consumer credit, because we're so in love with credit, we really like to have an expansion of debt. Consumer credit, thankfully, is still contracting, although you will hear them say that it's not. The only reason consumer credit, according to their measure, is not contracting is student loans. Yes, student loans. Here's a good one for you. So you look at the housing market, and we can all see what happened. We want more people to own houses. That's a good thing. We're going to make it cheaper to own houses. So we're going to subsidize it. We subsidize it by lowering interest rates and lowering standards. Okay. So we lower standards, we lower interest rates, now more people can get houses. Son of a gun if house prices don't go up. Do any of these guys take economics? You increase the demand for something and prices go up. Oh, prices are going up. That means this is working. That means this is a good thing. We should have more houses, so we lower the standards even more. Plus, what are you going to do? You start running out of people who can buy them at this standard, right? So you have to keep lowering your standards until by 2006, 52% of all the loans owned by our fabulous little fairies at Fannie and Freddie, who took a crap loan and turned it into AAA, 52% were subprime. And they're saying that banks were responsible? How the hell could banks have done this? Banks did what they did. Now, believe me and Stan O'Neill, give me 10 minutes alone with that guy and it's going to be ugly. He's the one who took down Merrill Lynch. 100-year-old company, he destroyed it. Not a fan of any of those guys. But they did what they were incented to do. Human nature, right? Federalist Paper 52. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. And if angels were to govern men, no controls, internal or external, on government would be necessary. Oh, screw that. We're going to do whatever we want because we know better. So what do? They know better than the free markets. We're going to make housing really affordable. The best way to do that, lower the standards. Then these banks, they know better. They don't want these junky loans. That's okay, don't worry about it. Sell it to Fannie and Freddie. And you take a crap loan, sell it to Fannie and Freddie, AAA. And then because of the Basel Accords, more regulation, because our regulators know best, they're smarter than any of us. Regulators said if it's a government-sponsored entity, Fannie and Freddie are those,